The air is heavy, damp with the smell of sweat, dust, and oil. You wake slowly, blinking against the dim torchlight flickering along stone walls. A barred window lets in the thin shaft of morning sun, cutting across the straw mattress beneath you. Your body aches, every muscle sore from the endless drills of the day before. You sit up and hear the familiar sounds around you, the clang of iron weights, the scrape of sandals on the training ground, the sharp bark of the lanista, the trainer who rules over this place with absolute authority. The Gladiator School, your new home, your new prison. You touch your arms and chest and feel the calluses forming, the bruises deepening. These are not the marks of freedom, they are the badges of a life you did not choose. Like so many who now share this barracks with you, you were taken, whether through war, debt, or punishment, it no longer matters. You belong to the ludus now. Around you are men of every background. Gauls and Thracians, strong-limbed and scarred, former soldiers turned slaves, criminals condemned to fight, and even a few Romans who volunteered, lured by the promise of money and fame. All of you stripped of your past, your names, your dignity, reborn as gladiators in training. In the silence of dawn, you wonder what your fate will be. Perhaps you will die in your first battle, blood soaking the sand before your name is even remembered. Or perhaps, if the gods favor you, you will rise, victorious, celebrated, desired. For in Rome, gladiators are both despised and adored, slaves in law, yet idols to the masses. The walls around you seem to hum with their stories. Men who once walked these halls have risen to glory in the arena. Their names still echo in the chants of the crowd. Some earned their freedom, clutching wooden swords of release, rudis, granted by their masters. Others fell, cut down beneath the roar of 50,000 voices in the Colosseum. You close your eyes, and in the darkness you hear it, the distant roar of a crowd. Imagined or remembered, it is a sound that will one day define your life. The cheers, the gasps, the thunder of feet stamping on stone as the games unfold. That is your destiny now. This is not the life you would have chosen, but it is the life you must endure. You are a gladiator of Rome, and from this moment on, your story begins, not as a free man, but as a fighter whose blood and sweat will entertain an empire.
Your life as a gladiator did not begin with a choice. Very few men ever chose this path. Most were forced into it by chains, debts, or the misfortunes of war. Your own story begins years before you ever set foot inside the Gladiator School. You were born free, though freedom in Rome did not mean comfort. Your family tilled the land, scraping a living from rocky soil, paying taxes that seemed to grow heavier every season. As you grew into strength, you learned the rhythms of hard labor, the swing of a hoe, the pull of an ox, the ache of long hours under the Mediterranean sun. But Rome was a vast empire, and its peace was always fragile. Borderlands boiled with conflict, rebellions sparked, and ambitious generals led legions into new territories. You were young when your village was swept up in one such campaign. Soldiers stormed through, taking grain, livestock, and the strong-bodied men. You were shackled and marched away, the dust of your home fading behind you. In the blink of an eye, you had become property. For others, the path was different. Some gladiators were criminals, condemned to fight as punishment. Others were slaves from birth, sold to the lanista, the manager of the gladiator school. And some, though fewer, were freemen who volunteered, lured by dreams of gold, glory, and the roar of the crowd. The Romans called them auctorati. They signed away their freedom, swore an oath of obedience, and stepped into the barracks willingly. Desperate men seeking to escape poverty or earn fame chose this brutal life for themselves. Whatever the road, all paths converged here, the Gladiator School. Once branded and registered, your old identity ceased to matter. You were given a new name, often mocking, sometimes heroic, sometimes tied to your origin. A Thracian might be called simply Thrax. A Gaul might be dubbed Celt. Your name was no longer your own. It was a label for the entertainment of Rome.
The oath you swore still lingers in your mind. Before entering training, every gladiator was made to repeat it aloud. I will endure to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be slain by the sword. It was not a vow of victory, but of submission, to the games, to the crowd, to the will of your master. With those words, your life ceased to belong to you. And yet, there was a strange allure to it all. Gladiators were despised as slaves, but they were also admired, even worshipped. In Pompeii, women scratched graffiti onto the walls, declaring their love for certain fighters. Crescens, the net fighter, is the heartthrob of the girls. Roman women wore charms in the shape of gladiators' helmets. Senators might sneer at you in the Senate House, but their wives and daughters whispered your name in secret. Your fate was brutal, but not without its temptations. Victorious gladiators could win fame, gifts, and money. With enough victories, even freedom was possible. Some men fought for years, finally rewarded with the rudis, the wooden sword of release, symbol of their liberty. For a slave, it was the greatest prize imaginable. But for now, that was only a distant dream. You were no more than another body in the ludus, another man destined to bleed on the sand. The life ahead of you was uncertain, a razor's edge between glory and death. Still, you could not help but feel the weight of destiny. Rome demanded spectacles, and you were now part of that machine. Your blood would be their entertainment, your victories their celebration, your death their amusement. You were a gladiator, not by birth, but by the unrelenting hand of fate. The Gladiator School was not just a place of training. It was a fortress. Thick stone walls surrounded the compound, shutting out the world and locking you into a life with no escape. At the heart of it all was the Ludus Magna, the great training hall, echoing with the clash of wooden swords, the grunt of effort, and the harsh commands of instructors. Your days began before the sun fully rose. The clang of a bell or the bark of a guard roused you from your straw pallet. Still stiff with sleep, you joined the others in the training yard, a space packed with wooden dummies, sand pits, and sparring posts. The lanista, or his assistants, the doctoress, watched over everything with sharp eyes. These men were usually retired gladiators, scarred veterans who had survived the sands long enough to teach others. Training was relentless. You learned to wield weapons far heavier than those you would use in the arena. The wooden swords you swung were deliberately weighted to build strength, making the real blades feel lighter in battle. Your arms burned, your shoulders ached, but the instructors demanded perfection. Every stance, every strike, every shield position was drilled into you until your body obeyed without thought. Different men were trained for different roles. The Romans loved variety, and gladiators came in many styles. You might be molded into a murmillo, with a heavy shield and fish-crested helmet, or perhaps a Thracian with curved sword and small buckler. Others became retiari, fighting with net and trident, their limbs unencumbered by armor.
Opposing them were secutores, whose smooth helmets were designed to counter the net fighters' tricks. Each type was designed to create contrast, heavy versus light, brute strength versus agility. The Romans cared less about fairness than about spectacle. Diet was another constant. Contrary to popular imagination, gladiators were not fed lavish meals of meat and wine. Instead, they were called hordearii, barley men. Their meals were simple: barley, beans, porridge, and water. The food was designed not for pleasure, but for endurance, giving bulk and stamina. Ash was sometimes added to their diet, believed to strengthen bones and aid recovery from wounds. Though the food was plain, it kept you alive, and life in the school was not without its strange comforts. You were property, yes, but valuable property. Owners invested heavily in their gladiators, and it was in their interest to keep you healthy. Physicians tended to cuts and bruises, trainers monitored progress. Compared to a common slave in the fields, you were worth more, and your survival mattered. Still, discipline was absolute. Disobedience brought swift punishment: chains, beatings, or worse. Some gladiators tried to escape. Few succeeded. The walls were high, the guards vigilant, and punishment for capture was brutal. Others resisted in smaller ways, slowing their pace, muttering curses under their breath, but all knew that rebellion was useless. The only true escape lay in the arena, either through victory or through death. Yet amidst the hardship, bonds formed. In the evenings, after drills ended, you sat with your fellow fighters in the barracks. Stories were shared, of lost homes, of battles fought, of families left behind. Men who had once been enemies, Gauls against Romans, Thracians against Greeks, now shared bread and drink. Brotherhood was forged in sweat and pain. There were rivalries too, simmering beneath the surface. Pride clashed with pride, tempers flared, and fists flew when insults were thrown. But even these fights were tempered by the knowledge that one day you might face each other under the blazing sun of the Colosseum. In that moment, only one would walk away. As you lay in your pallet at night, the barracks quiet except for the snores of exhausted men, your body ached with fatigue. But you also felt something else growing: strength. Day by day, the drills carved away weakness, shaping you into a weapon. You were no longer just a captive. You were becoming a gladiator. The day came when training was no longer confined to the walls of the ludus. You and your fellow novices were marched in a line, shackled 2 by 2, through the streets of Rome. Crowds gathered as you passed, some jeering, some whispering, others staring in fascination. To them, you were no longer men. You were gladiators in the making, destined for blood and spectacle. The march ended at the grandest structure you had ever seen, the Colosseum. Rising above the city like a mountain of stone, it towered over the Forum, dwarfing every temple and monument around it. Its arches stretched into the sky, tier upon tier, filled with the noise of 50,000 Romans packed inside. The air vibrated with anticipation, the rumble of voices like thunder before a storm. As you entered the shadow of its gates, the smell hit you first. Iron and sweat mingled with the stench of animals caged below the arena floor. Lions, leopards, and bears roared in their pens, their cries echoing through the passageways. The sound chilled you to the bone. These beasts, too, would play their part in the games. You and the others were not here to fight, not yet. You were here to watch, to understand what awaited you. The guards ushered you to a holding area where you could peer out through the grated doors at the spectacle beyond. And what a spectacle it was!
The arena floor gleamed golden beneath the sun, its sand freshly raked and levelled. Trumpets blared, their piercing notes silencing the crowd for a moment. Then came the procession. Lines of gladiators marching in formation, weapons flashing, helmets gleaming, banners flattering. They saluted the emperor, seated in his lavish box, and the audience erupted in cheers. You heard the famous words, though whispered among the trainees. Ave Caesar, moritori te salutant. Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you. Whether every gladiator truly spoke them or not, the phrase clung to the arena like smoke.
The first match began. A pair of lightly armed fighters, darting across the sand with speed and grace. One wielded a net and trident, the other a curved sword and shield. They circled, lunged, retreated, the crowd roaring with each clash. The fight was not a chaotic brawl, but a performance, skillful and precise, designed to thrill the audience. Every move mattered, every feint and strike adding to the theater of death. When one man stumbled, tangled in the net, the crowd gasped. The victor raised his trident, but paused, waiting for the signal. All eyes turned to the emperor. His hand hovered, then lowered, with a turn of the thumb. Mercy. The defeated gladiator lived to fight another day. You felt your heart pound. This was no simple execution. It was ritual, theater, and battle woven together. The crowd's passion was terrifying, their voices a storm that rose and fell with every strike of steel. And yet within that terror there was also a lure. To stand in that sand was to stand before the eyes of an empire, to be both pawn and hero in the same breath. The games stretched on. Beasts were unleashed, snarling and snapping as hunters faced them with spears. Chariots thundered in races across the arena floor. Mass battles erupted, dozens of gladiators clashing in staged reenactments of Rome's great wars. Blood stained the sand, but the cheers only grew louder. By the time you were marched back to the ludus, your mind reeled. You had witnessed both the horror and the glory. The Colosseum was no mere building, it was Rome itself, pulsing with the hunger for spectacle. One day soon, you would step onto that sand, and the crowd would decide your fate. That night, as you lay in your bunk, the roar of the Colosseum echoed in your ears. Excitement and dread twined together in your chest. You were no longer just training, you were preparing for destiny.
Back within the walls of the ludus, the rhythm of life was strict but predictable. Training, eating, sleeping, healing, it was a cycle that consumed your days. Yet outside the training ground, the world of the gladiator extended into strange and unexpected corners of Roman society. You lived in barracks, crowded with men who were brothers in arms, though never free of rivalry. The smell of sweat, oil and iron lingered in the air, mingling with the chatter of men recounting their battles or their wounds. Evenings were often filled with laughter and song, but also with silence. Men lost in thought, staring at the ceiling, wondering if tomorrow might be their last. And then there was the other side of life, the adoration. To the Roman elite, you were still a slave, little more than property meant to bleed for entertainment. But to the common people, you were something more. In the taverns and marketplaces of Rome, your names were whispered like charms. Walls were scrawled with graffiti declaring love for gladiators, especially the young and handsome ones. In Pompeii, one inscription reads, "Saladus the Thracian makes the girls sigh." Women, especially those of wealth and status, were drawn to gladiators with a fascination that both thrilled and scandalized. There were tales of senators' wives sneaking into the barracks, bribing guards for secret meetings. Roman poets mocked such affairs, warning husbands to guard their wives whenever gladiators passed by. The very men despised as slaves were, in the eyes of many women, symbols of raw strength and forbidden desire. Some gladiators embraced this adoration. Gifts appeared, small purses of coins, jewelry, or even letters written in delicate script. A few forged secret relationships, knowing that discovery could bring punishment, but also savoring the fleeting sweetness of being loved in a world where death was never far.
For you, the attention was both flattering and dangerous. As you sat in the training yard one afternoon, you remembered the eyes of a Roman woman in the crowd, her gaze lingering as you marched past. That look carried weight. Was it admiration, curiosity, desire? You could not know, but it stirred something within you. The strange realization that even as a slave, you had power. Power of a different kind, over the imagination of others. Daily life was not all whispers of romance, of course. Much of it was hardship. Food was plain and repetitive. Porridge, beans, bread. Your body ached with the constant strain of training. Bruises blossomed like flowers across your skin, never fading before new ones took their place. Some nights infection claimed a comrade, the barracks falling silent as another pallet lay empty. Yet, despite the suffering, you felt yourself transforming. Your arms grew harder, your reflexes sharper. The drills that once left you breathless became second nature. And the barracks, grim though they were, began to feel almost like home. You also learned about the gladiators' peculiar social standing. To senators and philosophers, you were the embodiment of disgrace, a man stripped of dignity, forced to kill for bread. But to the crowd, you were a hero. Children played with toy swords, pretending to be gladiators. Merchants sold play figurines shaped like fighters. Your image might one day be carved into a wall or painted onto a lamp, immortalized in cheap clay. It was a strange duality, loathed as a slave, adored as a champion. Every day you lived within that contradiction, pulled between shame and pride, fear and longing. And always the shadow of the arena hung over you, reminding you that admiration meant nothing if you could not survive the sand. Still, in the quiet hours of night, when the barracks hushed and only the distant barking of dogs could be heard, you allowed yourself to dream of freedom, of love, of living long enough to one day walk away from this life, not as a slave, but as a man.
The day arrived sooner than you had hoped. At dawn, the guards roused you and the others chosen to fight. The air in the barracks was thick with tension, men lacing sandals with shaking hands, others whispering prayers to Mars, Hercules, or whichever god they thought might listen. A few sat silent, their eyes hollow, already resigned to death. Your weapons and armor were laid out, waiting. For you, a curved Thracian sword, light enough for speed, paired with a small round shield. The helmet was heavy, its crest arched, the eye slits narrow. You could barely breathe once it was strapped on. Sweat dripped down your face, though the morning was cool. The trainers walked among you, checking straps, adjusting shields, offering curt words. Keep your stance. Don't show fear. Remember your training. You nodded, though your heart hammered so hard you feared the others could hear it. Then came the march, down into the belly of the Colosseum, through the shadowed tunnels that smelled of blood, beasts, and damp stone. The rumble of the crowd grew louder with each step, until it became a roar that shook the ground. Torches lined the passageways, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Somewhere nearby, a lion bellowed, its deep growl echoing like thunder. And then the light. You stepped out onto the arena floor, and the noise of 50,000 Romans crashed over you like a wave. The sun was blinding, the sand dazzling beneath it. You squinted through the narrow slit of your helmet, overwhelmed. The stands rose around you in tiers upon tiers, filled with faces, banners, and the glint of metal cups. The emperor himself sat in his box, shaded by a great canopy, flanked by senators and guards. The games began with ceremony. Trumpets blared, and the gladiators paraded around the arena. You raised your sword and shield as the others did, saluting the emperor and the crowd. Your arm trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment. Then, without warning, the first matches were called. Groups of men were ushered out, paired by type, Marmillo against Thracian, Secutor against Retiarius. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for blood. You watched as blades clashed, shields splintered, and men fell. Some fights ended with mercy, a defeated gladiator raising his finger to beg for his life, spared by the emperor's signal. Others ended in death, the crowd roaring as blood darkened the sand. Your name was called. The pit of your stomach dropped as a guard shoved you forward. Across the arena, your opponent emerged, a Marmillo, taller, broader, with a heavy shield that glimmed in the sun. His helmet, crested with the shape of a fish, gave him the appearance of some monstrous creature from the sea. A crowd cheered, sensing the contrast, the nimble Thracian against the brute force of the Marmillo. It was a match Rome adored. Speed versus strength, light versus heavy. The signal was given. You circled, sword poised, shield up. The Marmillo advanced, his shield raised like a wall, his sword ready to strike. He lunged, the blow slamming against your shield with such force that your arm rattled. The crowd roared at the sound of steel on wood. You darted back, heart racing, then countered with a quick slash toward his side. His blade scraped his armor, sparking cheers from the stands. He grunted, adjusting, pressing forward. The fight was relentless, each move a dance of survival. You dodged, blocked, struck, your training carrying you through the blur of fear and adrenaline. Then an opening. The Marmillo overextended with a swing. You stepped to the side and struck, your sword slicing across his thigh. He staggered, dropping to one knee. The crowd roared, surging to its feet. You stood over him, breathing hard, blade raised. But you hesitated. His hand lifted, a single finger extended, a plea for mercy. All eyes turned to the emperor. The Colosseum hushed, waiting. The emperor paused, then lowered his hand, thumb turned sideways. Mercy. Relief washed over you as guards dragged your opponent from the sand, alive but defeated. The crowd cheered your victory, your name echoing in their chant. For the first time you felt it, the intoxicating mix of fear, triumph,
and power. That night, back in the barracks, your body ached, your head throbbed, but you were alive. You had stepped into the Colosseum and returned. You had won.
Victory in the arena did not mean peace. It meant pain. When you returned to the ludus after your first fight, your body was bruised, your muscles trembling, and your shield arm numb from absorbing blow after blow. Every man who fought bore scars, whether he won or lost. The Colosseum did not let anyone leave unmarked. The school's physicians, strange figures with bloodied aprons and steady hands, were always waiting. Unlike common slaves, gladiators received medical care that was advanced for its time. After all, you were valuable property, worth more alive than dead. Doctors stitched wounds with catgut, set broken bones and cleaned cuts with wine or vinegar. They packed injuries with herbs, poultices, and ashes, remedies that smelled foul, but often worked. You learned quickly that scars were as much a part of your identity as your armor. Gladiators were called scelerati by some Romans, condemned men, but to the crowd, your scars were proof of courage. They leaned forward in their seats to see them, admired them as tokens of survival. Each mark etched into your flesh was another step in the strange path of honor and shame that defined your life. Recovery was not only physical. The days after a fight were filled with strange emotions: relief, pride, exhaustion, dread. Some men celebrated, boasting loudly in the barracks about their victories. Others lay silent, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the faces of the men they had fought. Death was never far away, and it clung to you even when you had escaped it. But survival brought rewards too. Victorious gladiators were showered with applause, sometimes gifts. Wealthy spectators threw coins into the arena, or jewelry, or even food, tokens of admiration for a fighter who had entertained them well. Back at the ludus, these gifts were collected and, depending on the generosity of the Lannister, sometimes shared with the fighters. You might receive a purse of coins, enough to buy better meals, small luxuries, or favors from guards. A man who survived long enough and won often enough could accumulate real wealth. There are records of gladiators earning far more in prize money than a common soldier. Though you were a slave who might one day hold silver in his hands. And then there were the attentions. Victory made you desirable. Women sent gifts, lockets, charms, even letters. Some risked their reputations for secret meetings. Roman writers joked bitterly about noblewomen sneaking into gladiator schools, their hearts stolen by men society otherwise despised. The paradox was sharp. You were both slave and celebrity, degraded and adored. The greatest prize of all was the rudis, the wooden sword symbolizing freedom. To win it required years of victories, the admiration of the crowd, and the generosity of your master. Few reached that point, but the hope lingered in every man's mind that one day he might walk out of the arena not as property, but as a free man. Still, for each tale of triumph, there were countless tales of ruin. Infection claimed many who survived the sword, a cut that festered, a fever that burned too hot. Such things ended lives as surely as a blade. Some gladiators became permanently maimed, their bodies broken by years of combat. They limped through the barracks, reminders of what awaited any man who lingered too long in the sand.
As you lay on your pallet after that first victory, your body bound in bandages, your arms heavy with fatigue, you understood the truth. The arena was not only about blood spilled in the moment, but about the cost that lingered long afterward. Victory was survival, survival was pain, and pain was the price of life as a gladiator.
Time passed, and with each battle survived, your name grew louder in the Colosseum. At first it was a few shouts from the crowd, then chants that echoed across the arena as you stepped onto the sand. Rome was a city of gossip, and gladiators were among its most talked-about figures. Children mimicked your stance with toy wooden swords. Vendors sold crude carvings of fighters in the marketplace. Graffiti appeared on walls, praising gladiators the way poets praised generals. You were still a slave, but you were also becoming something else, a star. With fame came privileges. Your lanista, keen to profit from your reputation, allowed you better food and small comforts, oil for your skin, wine to dull the aches, even a few coins to spend. You were invited to banquets where wealthy patrons displayed you like a prized hunting dog, boasting of your victories to their guests. Some treated you as an honored guest, others as an amusing curiosity, but all enjoyed the thrill of hosting a man who had stared death in the eye and lived. And then there was the admiration. For all the philosophers who sneered that gladiators were the lowest of the low, many Romans could not resist their allure. You heard your name whispered in marketplaces, scrawled in messages on tavern walls, or called from balconies as you passed. Women slipped notes into your hands, or begged guards for access to the barracks. It was said that senators' wives and even noble daughters sometimes pursued gladiators, scandalizing Rome with affairs that crossed the rigid lines of class. The paradox of your existence was sharper than ever. You were adored by the crowd, but despised by the elite. The Roman Senate saw gladiators as a stain on the dignity of the Republic's legacy. To you, you were living proof of decadence, a symbol of Rome's hunger for blood. And yet those same senators and magistrates still filled the amphitheater, their eyes gleaming with excitement as you fought. In the barracks, fame carried its own dangers. Rivals bristled at your popularity. Men who once trained beside you now eyed you with envy, waiting for the chance to face you in the arena. Each new victory made you more valuable, but also more of a target. Fame in the Colosseum was a double-edged sword, bringing both adoration and envy, both gifts and grudges. Still, the rewards were undeniable. After particularly thrilling victories, patrons showered you with gifts, rings, purses of coins, even the occasional promise of land. The wealthier and more adored a gladiator became, the closer he inched to freedom. And some men, upon receiving the rudis, chose to stay. Freed from slavery, they nonetheless returned to the arena, seduced by glory, riches, and the roar of the crowd. But beneath the cheers and the bright sunlight of the arena, darker truths lingered. Fame did not erase the constant presence of death. You had seen it too many times. Friends carried out on stretchers, blood soaking into the sand, and their names forgotten by the crowd within days. The cheers that lifted one man to glory could just as easily fade, replaced by the name of the next rising star. At night, lying in your bunk, you thought about what it meant. You were a man who killed to survive, who bled for the amusement of Rome, who basked in glory that could vanish in an instant. You were both powerful and powerless, exalted and enslaved. And yet, despite it all, you could not deny the rush.
When you stepped into the arena, when the sun beat down on your armor and the crowd's roar swelled to the heavens, you felt alive in a way nothing else could match. You were a gladiator, and Rome knew your name.
The day of your final battle arrived with little warning. You woke before dawn to the sound of the barracks stirring, men strapping on greaves, tightening belts, whispering prayers. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with tension. Even the most hardened veterans seemed subdued, as if sensing that today would be different. Your body carried the marks of years in the arena. Scars crisscrossed your skin, old wounds tugged at your muscles, and your left shoulder still ached from a blow taken long ago. Yet you were still strong, still swift, and your reputation had never been greater. Crowds now came as much to see you as to see the games themselves. Your name was painted on walls, your likeness scratched into lamps and amulets. You were no longer just a gladiator, you were a legend. But legends too must meet their end. As you were led into the tunnel beneath the Colosseum, the roar of the crowd thundered above. It was a sound you knew well, but today it seemed sharper, almost urgent, as though Rome itself was calling for blood. You adjusted your helmet, gripped your weapon tightly, and tried to steady your breath. The gates opened. Sunlight blazed across the sand, and the cheers of tens of thousands hit you like a wave. You stepped into the arena, raising your weapon in salute. The crowd erupted, chanting your name in rhythm, their voices echoing against the stone. Across the sand your opponent emerged, a man every bit your equal. He was taller, broader, with a reputation nearly as fearsome as your own. His armor gleamed, his shield was massive, and in his hand he carried a short sword worn smooth from countless battles. The crowd gasped at the sight of the two of you facing one another. This would not be a quick fight. This would be a clash of titans. The signal was given. He advanced, shield raised, testing your defense. You circled, light on your feet, searching for openings. The first clash of steel rang out like thunder, his sword slamming into your shield with bone-shaking force. You countered, your blade scraping across his armor, sparks flashing in the sunlight. The crowd roared at every strike, every feint, every dodge. The fight dragged on, sweat soaking your tunic, sand clinging to your legs. Each movement was now slower, heavier, as fatigue set in. You landed a cut across his forearm. He staggered, then lunged back with a strike that nearly pierced your side. Blood trickled down your ribs, hot and sticky beneath the armor. Still you fought. Blow after blow, the two of you traded strikes, each refusing to fall. The crowd was on its feet, shouting, waving, intoxicated by the spectacle. Trumpets blared, drums pounded, the sound of Rome demanding its entertainment. And then came the moment. Your opponent faltered, stumbling slightly on the sand. You struck hard, your blade smashing against his shield, knocking him backward. The crowd screamed as he collapsed to one knee, gasping, his sword slipping from his grip. You stood over him, weapon raised, your breath ragged. It was the choice every gladiator faced, to kill or to spare. His hand lifted, finger raised in the plea for mercy. The arena hushed, all eyes turning to the emperor. The emperor paused,
his expression unreadable. Then slowly, deliberately, his hand lowered, the thumb turned down. The crowd roared its approval, the sound shaking the very stone. Your opponent's eyes widened as he realized what had been decided. You hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then you brought the blade down. Silence fell for an instant, broken only by the sound of steel meeting flesh. Then the Colosseum erupted in cheers, the crowd rising as one, chanting your name, exalting your victory. You raised your sword, bloodied and trembling, and saluted the emperor. Yet, in that moment of triumph, a strange hollowness filled you. You had won again, but how many more times could you survive? How many more battles until the emperor's thumb turned against you? That night, back in the barracks, you lay awake staring at the ceiling. The cheers of the crowd still rang in your ears, but so too did the memory of your opponent's eyes in those final moments. You knew then that your path could end only one way, on the sand, beneath the gaze of Rome, as both champion and victim of the empire's insatiable hunger for blood. You were a gladiator, and the arena would claim you, as it had claimed so many before.
In the quiet after battle, when the cheers had faded and the barracks fell still, you often wondered what it all meant. The life of a gladiator was a strange contradiction, both despised and adored, enslaved yet celebrated, trapped in chains yet able to command the roar of thousands. You were a man reduced to property, and yet on the sand of the arena you became something larger than life. When you closed your eyes at night, the memories came back in fragments. The weight of the helmet pressing down on your brow, the grit of sand sticking to blood and sweat, the dazzling sunlight on the Colosseum's white marble, the deafening roar of the crowd as blades clashed. Each sound and sensation was carved into you as surely as the scars on your body. And yet, beneath the glory, there was always sorrow. The men who had trained beside you, laughed with you, shared bread with you, so many were gone, their lives cut short on the same sand where you now stood. Their names faded from memory, their stories lost, except for the brief moments when the crowd screamed for them. You carried those ghosts with you, silent companions in every fight. Rome celebrated its gladiators, but it never truly loved them. To the senators, you were a symbol of decadence. To philosophers, a cautionary tale. To the masses, you were entertainment, as fleeting and replaceable as the games themselves. The cheers that lifted you high would one day be given to another, and then another, until your name was little more than a scratched line of graffiti on a crumbling wall. And yet, despite it all, you mattered. For a moment in history, you lived in the gaze of an empire. You gave the crowd what they craved: courage, skill, and the spectacle of life and death. You embodied the Roman hunger for dominance, their fascination with power, their reverence for bravery, even when it came in chains. Some gladiators, through fortune and favor, lived long enough to win the rudis and their freedom. A few became teachers, passing their skills to new recruits. Others melted into the vastness of Rome, their scars and memories hidden beneath tunics as they tried to live ordinary lives. But for most, the story ended on the sand, beneath the emperor's gaze, their blood soaking into the ground of the Colosseum. And yet, centuries later, the world still remembers. The stones of the Colosseum still stand, scarred but unbroken, silent witnesses to all that passed. Tourists wander through its tunnels, imagining the thunder of the crowd, the clash of steel, the courage and terror of the men who fought there. Poets and historians still write of gladiators, symbols of both Rome's cruelty and its grandeur. You too would one day become part of that story, whether your life ended in triumph or in blood, whether you walked free or fell to the emperor's decree. Your existence as a gladiator was carved into the legacy of Rome. You were both victim and victor, entertainer and warrior, forgotten man and immortal symbol. And so, as you lay on your pallet after your final battle, staring at the flicker of lamplight against the stone walls, you understood. The life of a gladiator was not simply about death or survival. It was about what it revealed: the strength of the body, the resilience of the spirit, the desperate hunger of men to live even where life was reduced to blood and sand. You were a gladiator, a man who lived and fought beneath the gaze of an empire. And though your body might fall, the echo of your battles would carry forward through time, immortal in the memory of Rome.